you for joining us. Cynthia Vargas is with us today. I'm Christine, and this is the Heart Glow podcast. Very excited to chat with you about all things Stairwell, about your background. Cynthia, I know personally. She is my brother-in-law's sister, and I have known her for many years, and she's a curator, she's a researcher, she's just a wonderful human being. And she started a great organization in the middle of a pandemic, no less, in 2020 called Stairwell, an experimental art space where I've had the opportunity to stay, housed in a great domestic space in Westlake, Arthur Park area of Los Angeles. Some cool things I just wanted to chat and would love to have you talk to us a little bit more too about some of your exhibitions, your collaborations, including with Carmen Argote, with Leonardo Bravo, and Big City Forum. So I definitely want to chat about all things in this podcast. And I wanted to just get started. First of all, thank you. And wanted to chat about how you got to where you're at. I'm always curious to understand with folks, like, how did you get into the profession you're in and where you're at today? So tell us a little bit before we talk about Stairwell, about how'd you get there? Like, tell us about you and your upbringing in Los Angeles.
Christine, thank you so much for inviting me to be in conversation with you. And I've never done this before, so this is a new experience, and I think it just connects with how I got here, which is doing things that I might have been uncomfortable with, and just flowing with them. I guess I'll start with when I was growing up. There was a lot of influence of my older siblings. I'm the youngest of 7, and I didn't grow up with all of my siblings. Some of my siblings were in Guadalajara, Mexico, but there was this sort of notion of having these 2 homes, and I knew that they were there. I knew that they were my siblings, but we had these 2 different places to live. And even though I didn't personally live there, I would go and visit. And then eventually they all came to the US. But one of the things that I remember since I was really young was listening to music. And it was one of the pastimes that I remember being in the living room and listening to a vinyl record, the full A side, the full B side. And it was something that we did in the company of each other. And I was just fascinated by looking at record albums and the artwork in them. I remember one of them was the Rolling Stones Sticky Fingers that had the zipper, curiosity, like, what is behind that zipper? Or these really just amazing kind of like little paper navigations around the album covers. So I think music was just really an influence, and it got my mind just moving in the space of imagination. And I often felt when I was in school, elementary school through high school, often I don't know if it was just some neurodivergent entity that wasn't really being addressed at the time, but it really gave me the space to be in my own world with imagination and drawing and seeking things that were just different. And when I was a teenager, there was a family that moved in down the block from me. And I met the youngest son in the family, and we became friends, and then I would go over to their home, and it was just experiencing these conversations about Andy Warhol and Allen Ginsberg, and just these creative writers and artists. And I think it just sparked my curiosity.
Mhm.
And that was sort of the beginning of just really leaning into the exploration in the arts.
Mhm.
Aside from that, I think I remember taking art classes when I would go to Guadalajara.
Mhm.
They would be at the ex convento
Mhm.
in Guadalajara. And that was probably the most impactful thing for me
Mhm.
in that space,
Yeah.
on that side of the home.
Mhm.
And I remember imagining that I wanted to be the person at a museum that would select the artwork that would go on the walls. But I didn't know what that was called.
Ah.
And so I thought, naturally, I would probably study art
Mhm.
because that was my interest. And there was this sort of imbalance of what I want to do and what I should be doing.
Mm.
And because of I think that the influence of the science and the engineering in my family,
Mhm.
it just made sense
Mhm.
to go into science.
Mhm.
So when I started college, I started taking chemistry. So it was an undeclared major, but I was taking a lot of chemistry classes. And then at the same time, I started taking art classes. And then I just chose to make my own curriculum after that. And I didn't really follow the curriculum that was given to me. And that, of course, created a problem, but I got to have these really amazing classes in anthropology and art therapy. And it was just really fulfilling to do that. And that's when I learned that what I wanted to do was called being a curator. And I
Mm.
found that out a little bit later, which was when I did an internship through the Getty. I learned that that was an actual career. It was a function.
Mhm.
As I went along through school, I took other paths and other journeys, and I ended up working in marketing with a dance production company. And I did that for a while. And through them, I was able to take some additional classes in communications that they funded. And then I just continued along the path working in the nonprofit sector, in the marketing fundraising area. So I did that for many years. And at the same time, I still had this strong connection to the arts, and it was either participating in exhibitions or supporting other people's work, buying other people's work, buying artists' work. So I always had this desire to, this magnet that was drawing me back. And so it was in 2019 when I decided to leave my institutional job and really focus on art. And it was just with this realization of where you set more time, where you invest more time, that's what grows and flourishes.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do. I didn't start off with a marketing plan or with a business plan or what's the business model for this. And I really wanted to do away with some of those, that business talk. And I just gave myself time. And it was time to do traveling. It was time to not think. It was time to just immerse myself more in all the things that I was drawn to, which was having conversations with artists, going to exhibitions, having experiences, really exploring, and going back in time to moments that I had those connections.
Yeah.
And that's when it still wasn't an idea of to create Stairwell. It was more of, I think I want to work with artists more closely.
Yeah.
And that's where it started. And then the pandemic happened. And in a way, it was sort of, I had already given myself time. I had already slowed down in terms of this idea or notion of productivity. And the pandemic allowed me to really just continue in that space to give myself time. So the first thing that happened was thinking about the space that I was in. The space that I was in at the time is an apartment building that's owned by my family. And thinking about what can I do within this space. And at the time, an artist, Carmen Argote, was living with me. She had been doing several residencies around the world and really needed a time to just reflect and come to some life-changing actions. And it was just born from that experience of collaboration. And so that was the residency, and that's how it started. And then from the residency and work being created in the space, that's when the gallery started. And then that just continued flowing and multiplying and so forth. So
what you've created there is such a cool spot in Los Angeles. And I don't know, I felt like I wanted to create, and I can't paint. I'm not into like art, like traditional art. And I'm like, oh, where's my coloring book? Let me just get started doing something. But I did feel like in that space itself where you've created that for artists, I can only imagine it does feel a little bit more freeing, maybe being in a separate location than they're used to being every day.
I really think that the residency experience for artists is really life-changing, and it takes them out of their usual practice, and it puts you in an architecture that is unfamiliar to you in some ways, and then you try to make familiar connections, within a space. And the fact that it's a domestic space as well, I think turns that on in a different way than it might be if you were staying at a hotel, for example.
Right.
So that's it was important for me to have this space of comfort and something that felt like things were possible. Along with a lot of imperfections. This is a really old building that was built in 1916. So a lot of things are imperfect, and that's what life is sometimes. And I think that it really lends itself to really dive deep into process, the process of creating and the process of making art.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And tell me a little bit too about like, how do artists reach out? How do they work with you? Just curious of like, if I am somebody who wants to create and maybe don't have a space, or maybe I already have a space, but how do you do work with artists? And Just trying to understand that process a little bit more.
Well, so far I've worked with two artists. So the other artist that I've worked with and still work with is Leonardo Bravo, and I had a prior friendship with Leonardo and was very familiar with Leonardo's social practice as well as his art. And Leonardo approached me and said, "Hey, can we work on a collaboration?" And that's how it happened. And then from that collaboration came, this longer term residency. And I joke with both Carmen and Leonardo about how the residencies at Stairwell are lifelong because they continue. Yeah. So I don't really have a process yet in terms of how a selection or a proposal process or anything. In both occasions, it was very organic, and it was really the artist approaching me and me being able to offer support in different ways, because every artist needs something different. And it's finding out what those needs are to be able to support in the collaboration. I think in the future, there might be a process, but I don't know that yet.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes that's part of it, right? Like the process evolves. I feel like even when you start a new business, you have a vision of what you want to do, but a lot of times it's opportunity and that ease or being in the flow of what you love to do and what you really enjoy doing that brings whatever is next. So that's a cool part about being in the space that you're in. Cool. Tell us a little bit more about too, like what's next? Like what's your next passion project? Like what are you working on next as part of whether it's Stairwell or anything else that you're working on?
Well, the next thing coming up at Stairwell is not necessarily at Stairwell, but I'll be in conversation with Mimi Zeiger at the Mac Center, and that's on July 20th. And I'm really excited about that conversation because it's in conjunction with an exhibition at the Mac Center called Seeking Zone. And Alejandro Son, moving from Vienna to Guadalajara, and artists use photography to interpret the architectural structures that Alejandro created in Guadalajara. And I'm really excited to talk about some of the structures that I and my family inhabited in Guadalajara. So that's July 20th. And if you're in LA, I highly recommend that you go see that exhibition because it's beautifully curated. So that's happening. The artists that I work with have really amazing things going on right now. So at Stairwell, I have Leonardo Bravo's work that he created in Berlin. Leonardo was in LA, moved to Berlin, created work, brought it here to LA, and so I highly recommend that you come by. Reach out to me via Instagram. Send me a note, send me an email at stairwellgalleryla@gmail.com and come by. The other thing that is happening presently with one of the artists I work with is Carmen Argote has a solo exhibition at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, and that runs through September 10th. Beautiful exhibition. If you want to take a deep dive into your inner self the psychology of the self. I highly recommend that. And I'd be happy to meet with any of you there to do a walkthrough of the show.
Oh, that's so cool. It's so awesome to see you. I mean, it's not just art, it's like being with community, right? I love that piece of what art not just represents, but how it's bringing folks together. And you're building those community ties and across countries too, like from Vienna and like Guadalajara, Berlin, in this big old melting pot that's Los Angeles. Is so cool to see that. What would you give in terms of like advice to folks who are maybe just exploring? Because you mentioned it, and I think about too my own background of, hey, how did I get into certain fields, or how did I get to where I was at today? What influences I had? You mentioned music, but like, what is the biggest like maybe piece of advice you could give anyone who's looking to whether to explore a creative field or just to think about what's next for themselves, like making that time?
Well, it's time. You have to give yourself time. You have to really get out of the space of productivity and what that means. I feel like in a way it's really colonized our culture to think about success as a lot, having a lot, doing a lot. You have to do less in a sense. And I feel that when you give yourself time, when you invest time, things develop. And I think that the creative glow is within all of us. We just have to be open to accept it. It's a grace that I believe we have as human beings, and we have to allow for that to come in and then come out. And creativity is not only in things that we see in galleries and art museums or hear in music or read in books. It's also in science and in the discoveries that are being made in the planets and the universe and all of that. So I believe that it's everywhere. We just need to be open to receiving it and also open to manifesting it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So it's time. And
yeah, I love that. It's true. I think we're in a society that values a lot of how much can I get done, or that idea of multitasking. And that's why we have so many people, I feel, who are burnt out and tired and needing something else. And all folks who've talked about like, hey, career change. And I think there's just taking that time, carving it out for yourself, no matter 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And I feel like also getting yourself out of your space and your normal to-dos, how important that is to reshift your mindset. And just that small switch. And definitely experienced it being at Stairwell, being in that space of, oh, let's try something new. Let's try something different. Let's go to this other, even just different restaurants. Having grown up in Los Angeles was just really fun to do and experience. So you've created a wonderful space, a great organization, Cindy. Very proud to know you and honored to know you. And thank you for sharing so much time with us today, talking about Stairwell. And just for the folks who didn't hear it the first time, if they want to get in touch with you, they can reach out on your Instagram page at Stairwell
Gallery LA.
Stairwell Gallery LA. And they can DM you or they can email you as well. But I thank you so much for your time, and
Thank you
today. It's very exciting. And for the folks who didn't see that bike, the bike is also cool. I've been eyeballing since I have a bicycle.
Oh, yes, that's the bike and the telescope.
Yeah, you said,
And
ooh,
I
look
have
at
some of Leonardo Bravo's
works.
works behind me. So if anybody wants to come by and take a look at Leonardo's work, I have that. And I also have his reading list here. So that's available for anyone that wants to come by and chat, have a coffee.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. We'll definitely
Mhm.
share that. Take care, and I will hopefully talk to you soon and bring you back later for more good news that you have coming through.
Thank you, Christine.